Thank you, band, and thank you for being here at Stonehill Community Church this morning. It is a joy and an honor to welcome you here yet again, and we appreciate all the faces that are familiar, and there may be some of you who are guests today, and we especially want to welcome you. And I often say you can only be a stranger once at Stonehill Community Church. After that, you're a part of our extended family. So thank you for being here, and if you have questions about the church or about connecting in some way and growing spiritually, we'd be happy to help you with that. And there's lots of opportunities to do that. We do things in series here, and today we're starting a brand new series. It's been a joy to welcome both guest speakers and familiar faces here to the table over the last few weeks, and they have done a great job for us, and we praise God for that. And it's given me an opportunity to kind of reload and recalibrate and think things through and kind of align ourselves for the next short term here in the fall. And one of the things we're going to be doing in this series, and they can pull up the slide for us if you would, the series title is What Love Does, Christianity Lived Out 24/7, 365. Sometimes we don't just go to church, we are the church. Don't just go to church, be the church. And that means putting food in the belly of an elementary school student sometimes. The whole clothing carrying closet was started because we wanted kids to be able to show up and do those I-step tests and all those other things where they have some shampoo to wash their hair and soap to wash their body so they can show up fresh and clean and be ready to do those tests. That's what got that whole thing started. So love does sometimes. What does love do? Well, it's something that we do 24/7, 365. And what's so amazingly practical is that the Bible has addressed all the different things that love does. And we're going to be looking at some of the practical application passages of the Pauline letters. All right? Paul's a guy who wrote many letters to churches and individuals, and he many times in his letters he will lay a theological foundation. He will argue very carefully for certain points, certain themes and thoughts and things. He'll address some practical issues, yes, but he'll lay a theological foundation, and on that foundation he transitions then and begins to build some application in light of what God has done in Jesus for us in the world. Therefore, this is what I want you to do, in a phrase, what love does. And so we're going to be dealing with this, a very practical series. You don't want to miss it. And one of the other fun things we're going to be doing is we will be incorporating various individuals from our congregation who will come, and I may start a message, I'll transition to them, they'll share maybe a little section of it, and then I'll come back out and close it, and that kind of thing. And so we're going to vary that approach, but we'll be creative with it. But you'll be hearing from different individuals as well. And so I like the idea of team teaching. It gives a couple of sets of eyes on the subject matter and helps us to think about it in a more comprehensive way. What love does. What love does. When love is a theory, it's safe. It's free from risk, but it changes nothing. But when love does, lives are changed. You can want love, you can feel love, you can say love, but in the end, love does. Love is an action. And when we look at the book of Romans in particular, and this is where we're going to start here in the series, you get through those first 11 chapters of the book of Romans, and Paul, of course, writes chapter 1 about how bad off the human race is, how far astray we have gone. He writes about, up through chapters 2 and 3, he writes about the great the need for justification before God because we're not righteous. But He makes us righteous through the merits of the work of Christ. That's Romans 3, 4, and 5. Then he talks about a Spirit-filled life. He talks about our setting apart of our life, and the Spirit infuses our life and enables us to do what we never thought we could do, and not just do, but it transforms us from within. And so we see that, and then we get to Romans 9 through 11, and we see Paul talks about Israel a little bit and how that they're not set aside. God still has a plan. He will fulfill His promises to them. And then we get to Romans 12, 1 and 2, and we read those great familiar words, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship, and do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And we read that and we think, wow, that's powerful, and it's definitely a thematic pivot in all that Paul has written to us about up until that point. And we might be tempted to think that maybe we've reached the heart of the book of Romans. And then after Romans 12, 1 and 2, we read about the spiritual gifts that God has blessed in the body. And that's awesome. But then we get to a place where Paul begins to write about what love does. And love does is really the whole intent of this epistle. And he's calling upon the believers to live life with a love does proposition. And he's inviting them to not just theoretically think about love or even try to define love, but to live love. And so it's like Paul is saying, look, here are 11 chapters of what God has done for us and for the world to make all that's possible in Romans chapter 12, 9 through 21. And I want you to dedicate your life to Him. And this is one of the ways that your mind can be renewed, is in some of these practical, quick exhortations to love that Paul gives us, that comes in Romans 12, 9 through 21. And so we're going to be working the soil of Romans 12, 9 through 21 here for a few weeks, and we may move on to another practical application section of another Paul's letters, but this is where we're going to be for a little bit of time here. And I want to set it up this way. There's a little insight that we get in Acts chapter 18, 1 through 3. And you kind of read it and you don't really think about it that much, but I think it's a very telling piece of information that helps us set up the backdrop for the people that Paul was writing to about what love does. After this, we read Paul left Athens. This is Acts 18, 1 through 3. And he went to Corinth, and there he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Claudius, the emperor, had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them. That is, he went to see Aquila, the Jewish man with his wife Priscilla. He went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and he worked with them. So here's what we see. The Roman Emperor Claudius, who was in office in AD 41 to 54, he didn't like the Jewish people because they had a reputation in Rome. And they were constantly arguing and fighting and stirring up trouble in their synagogues and community. And do you know what they were fighting about? They were fighting about this guy named Jesus that had upended their Judaistic religion, that had fulfilled all of it, presented himself as their Messiah, and some had bought in and some had not bought in. And in Rome, they were butting heads over this particular issue. In fact, a Roman historian, Suetonius, in his history, The Lives of the 12 Caesars, he says this. He says, and I quote, "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christ, the emperor, of course, is Claudius, he, the emperor, expelled them from Rome." And so we have secondary sources outside of the Bible who confirm what the Bible has recorded here in Acts 18. And so Romans was written about 52 AD. And so when the decree of Claudius in 49 AD to expel the Jews from the city came along, the Gentile members of the church in Rome took a more predominant role. And not only that, With the Jewish expelling that took place, it had created a lot of relational turmoil. Think about it. Think about it. You're in a community, you're running a business, life is going well, you're raising your family, and then because of some person who is determined to make their argument and their point, they're going to create, in fact, they create so much chaos that the emperor says, "You're out of here. Get out of our city. Get out of our community. You're ruining everything. We've got a good thing going here in Rome. And you Jewish people, and you're arguing over some guy by the name of Christ, and you're creating all this havoc, and it's messing up our city. We want you out of here." Now imagine you know people that got expelled, and you know what you're friends with them, they're your family or whatever, and now they have to leave. Pull up roots and leave. Think about how aggravated you would be. Think about how upset you would be. Think about how maybe revengeful you might become. That somebody else has set up this whole mess, and you've lost some of your best friends because of some argumentative, narrow-minded, blinders on the eyes. They can't see bigger picture things, and they're not open to entertaining new ideas, especially that new and novel idea that somebody came storming out of the grave on Easter morning. See? You see how much turmoil they're in Rome? Okay? And so Paul, it's that backdrop that we want to keep in mind when we read these words that Paul seemingly strings together haphazardly somewhat in staccato. In fact, John R.W. Stott calls these staccato imperatives. Short, choppy commands. Boom, boom, boom. One after the other. May be related to the one that just came. It may or may not be related to the one that follows. But they're boom, boom, boom. What love does. What love does. And boom, 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 boom. He lays it out. Because these guys needed this exhortation because they're at each other's throats in Rome because of all the mess that their argumentative disposition has created. The church is divided in Rome. So Paul, in a very strategic, theological way, he lays out the gospel, and then he says, because of this, we want you to live this way, and here's how you can live out all that God has done for the world in and through Jesus. First 12 chapters of Romans, and now let's pivot. Let's start living it out. Let's be the gospel, not just tell the people the gospel. Not just preach the gospel, not just say the gospel. Right? Proclaim the gospel, and if necessary, use words. It's a good approach. And Paul says, this is how you guys can redeem this thing. And I want to pull you together in Rome. You've been through a tremendously divisive event. And the church has really suffered from it. And if we're not careful, we're going to form this community that no one wants to be a part of. And you know, when we study these exhortations that Paul gives us, when we study them, we realize he's pulling them from lots of different sources and places. He just pulls them together. Some of these exhortations are quotations or allusions to what Jesus taught. Some of them are found in the Hebrew Old Testament. The Jewish recipients of this letter would appreciate it, especially the Jewish people that would eventually assimilate back into the city after this expulsion period had ceased. And so there's some Hebrew Old Testament quotations. There are even some of the exhortations that are found in the apocryphal books. These are extra biblical books that didn't get included in our 66 books in our Bible. And so Paul pulls these staccato imperatives, as John R.W. Stott calls them, these commands, these are quick, short, choppy commands. He pulls them from a lot of different places, seemingly from all of their favorite sources. Those who love the apocryphal books, those who love the Hebrew Old Testament, those who love the teachings of Jesus. He pulls these quotations, these exhortations, from across the board of all the resources they had access to. And he says, now you want me to sum up what love is? I'm going to quote from every one of all your favorite books, all your favorite gurus and teachers. I'm going to quote from all of them. I'm going to show you what love is. And I'll use their source documents to show you. When Paul says he's answering the question, what love does, against the backdrop of a divisive community in Rome, people that are full of, and have you noticed that maybe we're living in a loveless time? Have you picked up on a lot of lovelessness in the world today? That was their world. There's a lot of lovelessness. And it's really kind of scary. You just feel all alone in the world. Paul says, slide number 2, if you would please. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. If somebody was responsible for getting your friend booted out of the city 10 years ago, are you going to practice hospitality with them? Maybe not. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you. Live at peace with everyone. Come on, Romans. Hear me, he says. Do not take revenge, my dear friends. You're going to be tempted to take revenge so many times when your family or friends get expelled out of a city, right? But leave room for God's wrath. He'll take care of it. It's written, it's mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. These words are the essence of Christianity lived out in a practical way, 24/7, 365. And I imagine this morning every one of you here would love to live life this way, just like that. If we could take these exhortations all together, a kind of profile emerges. And it makes for a great leader, a great teacher, a great co-worker, a great teammate. Avoid hypocrisy. Be sincere and genuine, verse 9. Be loyal to colleagues. Treat others like brothers and sisters, verse 10. Give preference to others. Honor others above your own, verse 10. Be hospitable. Meet the needs of others. That's verse 13. Return good for evil. Act rather than react. Identify with others. Your victory is my victory. Your defeat is also my suffering. Be open-minded. Connect with all. Show respect. Keep peace. Remove revenge. Paul's like, I want you to be a part of a community like this. And I want you to form a community like this. And one of the first things he says in this litany, this list of Christianity lived out 24/7, 365. The first thing, Romans 12, verse 9, you see it at the top of your screen, sets the tone for the rest of the passage. Love must be sincere. Authenticity is the hallmark of this new Jesus-centered movement. Love must be sincere. Here's the sermon, slide 5. Slide 5. Here's the sermon. Right here it is. You want to take it home. Here it is. Love does with a pure motive. There it is. Love does with a pure motive. You know, this verse could be translated as love must be without hypocrisy, and some versions actually translate it that way. love must be without hypocrisy. In other words, our love for others must be genuine or authentic. It can't be counterfeit. Don't just pretend like you love others, but really love them. And the way that you really love them, love does. Love sacrifices. Love listens. Love is present. And of course, presence is implied. You can't do these staccato imperatives very well unless you're with other people. Presence is implied in all of them. And you sacrifice for them. This is what love does. What is the difference between real love and fake love? Simple. It's not hard. Actions. Actions. That's the difference. And it's not just actions, but it's actions with a pure motive. And real or sincere love demonstrates itself by actively helping others. And I have to ask the question, though, because obviously Paul saw a need to say, be sincere in your love. Obviously, why would we bother to show an insincere love? That's a question you have to have when you read that. Why would I pretend to be loving and not really be? Someone said insincerity is saying what one believes another person wants to hear. Why? Why would we be insincere in our love? Well, maybe it makes us look better if we pretend like we're loving, but we're not really. Or maybe it gets us something that we want from somebody. Just take the whole idea of an apology. Now, I'm sure a lot of them could have apologized to others in the Roman community, especially when it was their argument and their problems that got the Jewish people and all the other people, persecution, expelled from Rome, all these different divisions and arguments that stemmed from this. I'm sure probably apologies needed to be spoken when the dust settled and smoke cleared. And so let's just take that as an example. And when it comes to saying I'm sorry, and sometimes we all need to say I'm sorry because we're not perfect. And sometimes love says I'm sorry. I messed that up and I didn't see it right. And I've been instrumental in some things and I just apologize. Well, Paul says if you're going to apologize and show love that way and be forgiving and things, understanding and loving, don't say I'm sorry and not be authentic about it. Sometimes the way it's said, the tone that's used, or the flippant attitude that's part of the apology, that leads us to believe, yeah, you're saying the right words, but you're not sincere. Right? You're not sincere. And so when you say I'm sorry, for example, over and over again, but everything else in your life is inconsistent with that, Paul would say that's insincere love. It's not love. Sometimes we say I'm sorry and people don't believe it because our actions say something much louder and much different. And so when we reflect on Paul's words that we just read, I'm sorry, please forgive me, but I'm not devoted to you. I'm not going to have you in for dinner. Hospitality, not a chance. Not a chance. If you mourn, it will bring me a little joy. And if I ever get the chance, I'm going to pay you back. Huh? That's exactly what he's saying. Don't live that way. Yeah, some stuff has happened, but you've got to let it go. And how do you know when an apology is heartfelt and meant? You're kind to them. You cover for them. You put them first. You forgive them. That's how love does. You see? So love is not a theory. It's not some ephemeral idea that hangs out here in the clouds of Neverland. It is a practical proposition. Love does. And until love does, it's not love. It's not love. It's insincere love. If you say I'm sorry, but it's really because you want something in return, it's insincere love. One lady wrote, "Dearest Jimmy, no words could ever express the great unhappiness I've felt since breaking our engagement. Please say you'll take me back. No one could ever take your place in my heart. So please forgive me. I love you. I love you. I love you. Yours forever, Marie." And then P.S. and congratulations on winning the state lottery. Isn't that great? Insincere love. The operative word is authenticity. Romans 12:9. Some translations, like I said, have without hypocrisy, and it means living your life with a mask. And if you look closely and analyze the word in Greek that's used, we get our word hypocrisy from it, or a hypocrite in the first century wasn't just someone that was trying to do good and sometimes didn't, and that's not a hypocrite anyway. I mean, you're trying to do good and sometimes you miss it, and sometimes you hit it and the mark, and sometimes you miss the mark, and things. But we have these bad connotations about a hypocrite today, somebody being very inconsistent, insincere, and so on and so forth. But a hypocrite was a play actor, and it's a drama term, and it means living your life. When we are living life without hypocrisy, without insincerity, without the idea of putting on a play for somebody and acting out a drama for somebody, it means that we're living life without a mask. We're being appropriately vulnerable and real. Now, I say appropriately vulnerable and real and present. We can be tasteful in our vulnerabilities, and we should be. But love must never be used as a disguise for ulterior aims. True love, Paul would tell you, is free from pretense and hypocrisy. It doesn't say, I'm going to treat you in a certain way such that I can get something from you later. It's loving people because of who they are in Christ. And to love someone to get them to buy something from you, or to promote something you happen to like, or satisfy some need in your life, is a shallow, insincere love. And there was a lot of that going on, especially in Rome in the first century, and there's still a lot of that going on today. And Paul says, what love does are actions. Genuine actions done with a pure motive. In ancient Greek theater, as I kind of referenced, all the actors played multiple parts. And so if you were a man, and if we look on slide number 7, maybe there's some samples there. If you were a man, you could play the part of another man. You could play the part of a woman. You could play the part of a child. Disguise your voice a little bit. Put your mask on. So one actor or actress could play many different parts in a drama and represent many different characters. And they could pull it off if they were really good at what they were doing. And they could play these various characters and portray various emotions with those masks. And Paul says that building a community where restoration and life change and closeness can develop, we all have to learn to take off our mask. And that's scary. And we have to take our mask off and stop pretending to be something we aren't. And so when Paul tells us that love is to be non-hypocritical, he is saying that those who love are not to play a role, but rather to be genuine. In other words, we are to get off the stage and drop our mask. Here's who I am. And when we do that, the very first staccato imperative, to use Stott's phraseology, the very first one, I'll be daggone if it is, will you guys just be authentic? Sometimes that's what he says to us. That's what Paul is saying to us. He's saying to us today, just be authentic. That's an act of love. Did you know that? If you'll just drop your mask. It's scary. Drop that mask and let yourself be seen. Even the unhidden parts of you that maybe you're afraid of. Some people wear an I'm tough mask. Some wear an I'm holy mask. And the world is full of people who are trying to act bigger than they are. And maybe you heard the story of the newly promoted colonel. He moved into his new office and he wanted to act big and important. And a private came toward his office, a private, low-run guy, right? He quickly picked up the telephone, that is the colonel, wanting to sound big and important. He picks up his telephone and he says quickly, "Yes, General, I think that's an excellent plan. Thanks for passing that by me. Yes, General, call me anytime you need advice. General, I'm here for it. In fact, let's do lunch next week." And he hung up the phone. And he asked the private that had just entered the room, whom he was trying to impress, "And what could I do for you today, Private?" And the private slowly and sheepishly replied, I'm just here to hook up your phone. Busted. Well, somewhere an I'm successful mask, somewhere a look at my great ideas mask. One of the stranger enigmas of modern history is the 18th century French thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And it's kind of fun to say Jean-Jacques. You know, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it kind of sounds cool when you say it. And he had these great ideas. He was immensely influential in the 18th century Europe, and he believed he loved the entire human race with a unique and special kind of love. Let's just leave it at that. Yet Rousseau's life was a complete mess of failed relationships and sexual perversion in his life. He exploited his family. Here's a guy that says, I love the whole world with a unique love. But he couldn't love the little guy that God gave him. He couldn't love the woman or women in his life and his family. He exploited his family for all the cash he could get. He sponged money off of wealthy families. And during his life, Rousseau had 4 illegitimate children, and he abandoned all 4 of them as infants on the steps of a local orphanage. And this is from a guy who says, I love the world. You do? Well, why don't you just throw the ball with me, Daddy? Let's just start there. Well, and it was rough. A lot of those kids died in orphanages in that day. He knew what he was sentencing them to. Yet he proclaimed that he loved the human race more than any other person ever had. What a living contradiction. Such insincere love. You see, when we look at the Bible and we look at what Paul says and even what Jesus lived out, love is not a theory. It's not some great, elaborate expose from a Frenchman who says, this is how you love the world? Jean-Jacques Rousseau? No. Love. It's easy to talk about love way out here. Paul says love does. That's how you know you love. And that's sincere love. You see, at the heart of the Christian community is an honesty with ourselves. And that's what Paul wants it to be in Rome, and that's what we want it to be here, that we're honest with our doubts and our tendencies and our weaknesses. And maybe you have a mask on today, and while it might feel safer for you that way, maybe there's something even better, and that's having people love you even in your unhidden places. Wouldn't that be great? Consider this anonymous letter. I found it I'm a big fan of Les and Leslie Parrott, and they have a lot of good things to say about relationships and marriage. And this comes from them. It's an anonymous letter that they had received. Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face I wear. I wear a mask. I wear 1,000 masks that I am afraid to take off, and none of them are me. Pretending is an art that is second nature to me. But don't be fooled. The anonymous writer writes, for my sake, don't be fooled. I give the impression that I'm secure, that all is sunny and unruffled within me as well as without, that confidence is my name and coolness is my game, that the water is calm and I am in command and that I need no one. But don't believe me, please. My surface may seem smooth, but my surface is my mask, my ever-varying and ever-concealing mask. And this final paragraph says, who am I, you may wonder? I am someone you know very well. I am every man you meet. I am every woman you meet. I am right in front of you. If we wear our mask long enough, we may guard against what we feel will be rejection, and we might even be admired by a few, but we'll never be whole. We'll never be whole. And in Jesus, we are fully accepted through the gospel. And that's what Paul argues for 11 whole chapters in Romans. And in light of that, he says, in this full acceptance in Jesus through the gospel, Paul says, will you do me a favor? Will you start living it now? And let it make inroads into your relationships. Let it heal the beef from the past. Let it pull you together, because you are a community that believes that love does. And as I think about authenticity over hypocrisy, slide number 6. Slide number 6, if you would, please. When I think about authenticity over hypocrisy, I think of what Susie Larson has shared, and her quote here is on the front of the bulletin today, and it's a sermon in and of itself. If you only share successes, you build walls. If you share failures, you build bridges. Man, it's so true. You build bridges. But it takes someone committed to that deeper definition of what love truly is, and that love, authenticity, is the first point we make here in this series when it comes to love doing something. Just be authentic. That's an act of love. It builds bridges to people in their lives, in your life. So I ask you this morning, church family, do you have doubts? So does everyone else. Do you have some life secret that if your family knew, your friends knew, you'd be so shamed out over it? Welcome to the club. Welcome. Do you sometimes commit a sin? Get ready. Me too. Whoa. Do you sometimes commit a sin? I'll say it again. Me too. Do you have trouble forgiving people who devalue you? Do some people drive you crazy, especially when to them you are a basket of deplorables? Just thought I would interject that thought. You know what I think is a basket of... Here we go. You know what I think is a basket of deplorables is when people stereotype, loop and group larger groups of other people and label them as a deplorable. I think that's deplorable, don't you? Do you sometimes get angry and use bad words or think bad thoughts? You're human. Sometimes you're not doing fine. Sometimes your back hurts, your teenagers are complicating your home life, you're unhappy with what aging is doing to your body, your spouse is giving you the silent treatment, and you have some serious issues with Christianity or the Bible. We often are under the impression that I must have my life together in order to go to church or be a part of a community dedicated to a love does proposition. If I can't get it together, I'll make everyone think that I have it together. Boom, there's the mask. And sometimes even the citizen of the year gets sidetracked. Sometimes even the citizen of the year goes down a path he shouldn't go down or thinks a thought he shouldn't think. Sometimes. See, the cry of our generation and of this particular age is to be real and to lead authentic lives and to view that as acts of love. To be vulnerable is to build a bridge from one person to another, and it builds an authentic community of love, drawing people into it. It's good news. It's the gospel. It's good news in a world where there's so much bad news. Authenticity attracts. What does it mean to be authentic, sincere in your love? Just be you. Just be you. A Jesus-centered you, as best as you can, that loves people because they're in the image of God. You can be real with your emotions. You can be open about your weaknesses. You can be willing to learn from your mistakes. Be willing to take input from others. When people see us grapple with our fears and they see us struggle with our losses, talk openly about our big life hang-ups, how we find refuge and new identity in Christ that we can live from, that attracts. And it's the beginning of a sincere love does proposition. And that's why authenticity is an act of love. That's why. It creates a family. It creates a place where people can slowly take that mask off. And I'll be daggone, they didn't run away. They still love me. Wow. Okay? And so this is what love does. And if we think about some quick application points, and these are in your YouVersion events notes from our message here today, there are 3 principles, I think, that will help all of us overcome a hypocritical tendency in our lives. These temptations we have of not being authentic and real and sincere in our love. The first one is exposing hypocrisy is helpful, so let's see it. And that's half the battle, is to see where we in our own life, the mask that we're hiding behind. And you know, it's interesting, the harshest things that Jesus had to say. Jesus was always so tender, but if he ever sounded harsh and came close to sounding harsh and being harsh, it was with religious people who would not get vulnerable. And that was usually the Pharisees, who hid behind "I'm a righteous person" mask. So expose hypocrisy. It's helpful for us to do that. It's helpful for us to see it in our own lives. Secondly, to practice hypocrisy is natural, so let's resist it. It appeals to the old nature in us. Hypocrisy shows itself in 2 ways, one author says. One is that it tries to make the outside look better than the inside. 2, we hide our own flaws by drawing attention to other people's flaws so that our flaws don't show up as clearly. Good point. Third, breaking with hypocrisy is a painful process, but stay at it, church. Let's stay at it. It takes time for us to move into a life of authenticity and to wean ourselves away from the praise and approval of other people, and that takes time. I'll close it here this morning, this first message here in the series. One of the most authentic Christians that I have encountered, have not met him personally, but just in what I've read about him, I've watched some of his presentations on YouTube. Bob Goff, slide number 9, if you would for me. Bob Goff, he's a lawyer. He wrote a book, Love Does, and one of his big commitments and priorities is to help the cause of justice in places like Uganda, where he holds witch doctors accountable, for example, and takes them to court for destroying and mutilating young men in some of their practices. Many other things beyond that. But this is a guy that's committed to a love does proposition. And he includes stories in his life about places he's been and experiences he's had and people that he's learned from about love and what love does. And he tells about one time trying to lose weight with some buddies joining him in the effort. And on the first morning of this new effort with his friends, to lose a few pounds, he's standing in front of the refrigerator door with the door open, and he reaches for a bagel and Philadelphia cream cheese in the familiar silver wrap packaging. And he thought he'd spread it a little thinner this time in light of his recent commitments, and so he spreads the cream cheese a little thinner, and he thought maybe that would help in his weight loss goals. And they had a family friend, Ashley, who was staying at their house on this particular weekend. And he thought maybe Ashley has brought some low-fat cream cheese because he tasted it and it was awful. And he thought, well, maybe if I put more of it on, this fake cream cheese might taste a little more like the real thing. And so he puts a little more on, and he said it's still terrible. It wasn't any good. And so his wife comes in and he tells her, you have to tell our friend Ashley to not get this low-fat cream cheese stuff anymore because it's absolutely awful. And his wife was puzzled. She shakes her head. She goes and looks in the refrigerator, checks it out, starts belly laughing. And Bob is like, what's up? And she said, "You have just nearly eaten a whole bar of Crisco lard." Yes. Bob Goff ate Crisco lard, a bar of Crisco lard, thinking it was Philadelphia cream cheese for his bagel. You know, he says there's stuff that masquerades like the real thing, but it's not. And instead of putting it down, he says, we put more on. He said, if you ask 1,000 people who don't want anything to do with religion or being a part of a local church or why that is, they'll tell you all the different reasons they don't like it. But I doubt they'd ever be describing the real stuff. They'd describe a guy or a gal on a television show, he says, who told them if they gave money they'd get rich, or they'd talk about the big hairdo or the outrageous makeup. They talk about someone who was religious but broke their hearts or the promises, or they lied or they got caught or they went to jail, or who cried a lot on camera but it looked like they were kind of faking it. Or they'll talk about someone who told them that God hated who they were or how they lived and maybe who they married or who they couldn't forgive and what they had done with their lives and how awful that was. He said the only way to change this is for them to encounter somebody who can give them a taste of the real thing. And he says, you and I have a shot at being that person. None of us want to make good or God look bad, but when love is not sincere, it makes people think that God tastes like Crisco. And it's not surprising when they have some indigestion. When people ask me what it looks like to follow Jesus, says Goff, I usually say that following Him looks like dealing with all the other issues everyone else deals with in life. Disappointments, tremendous joy, uncertainty, the whole bit. And having your mind change all the time as you learn how Jesus would have dealt with these things. I like that. And following Jesus is about having your paradigm shift as you navigate a wide range of emotions while living the big life Jesus invited you into. And he says, because I know Jesus, where I once thought of things in one way, now I think of Him in another way. It happens all the time, every day. Come and join me in the journey toward authenticity and being real with life. And in a world where love is getting less and less, perhaps one of the greatest gifts you can give to a community, you lower that mask and you say, here I am. I'm on the Jesus journey. But boy, I'm wrestling with things just like you. But God's got a plan. The world can make you think that love can be picked up at a garage sale or enveloped in a Hallmark card. But the kind of love that God created is a costly one. Because it involves sacrifice and presence. And perhaps that is why sometimes Jesus is called Emmanuel, God with us. I think that's what God had in mind for Jesus to be with us, to be present. I'm with you. And when we see that truth, we're free to be with others as they make their way into a new discovery of what really is important in life. And I think one of the greatest things to work toward and what is important in life is someone who builds a bridge. Maybe they share a failure. They build a bridge. And they're authentic. And they listen. And you're going to be hearing more about that in the upcoming days in this series. Will you pray with me? Thank you, God, for this day. Thank you for this church family. We ask and pray this morning that we would understand what Paul is trying to demonstrate to us here. And that is that authenticity is so much what the world needs. It's so much what this generation needs. And I just pray that you would help us, guide us in this journey. We want to live a life of love 24/7, 365. And I just pray you'd help us to do that, have the courage to do that. Now you direct our lives. Help us to grow in Jesus. And sometimes in growing in Jesus, we are called to love the people next to us. And they are a stand-in for you. And since you're not here in bodily form, they are. And so to us, for all intents and purposes, they are a little Jesus. And so that little hungry elementary school student who gets excited about his bag of food on Friday, to us, he is a little Jesus. And that one that shows up to take his test with greasy hair and dirty skin, but now maybe with clean hair and clean body, so you can focus on the questions a little easier. That person to us is Jesus. Maybe our neighbor is Jesus, and maybe the person we work with is Jesus. And as we think about this, I'm not so sure, but what everybody we see and meet are a stand-in for you. And so you help us to be to these an authentic testimony of what love is. And help us to live a love does proposition. And I ask you, God, give us courage and give us strength to live every day in an open, nothing to hide kind of approach, openly confessing our need of you. And Lord, we pray especially you would be with the families who have lost those they love, and as plans come together for these moments to share, and I just pray that you'd be lifted up in all of it, and you would direct us in these days as ongoing prayers being made for what's ahead of us nationally and internationally even. And so you guide us now in Jesus' name. Amen. You stand with me. You've been a great group and appreciate your love. Now let's go love the world, shall we? How do we love the world? Through action. Let's take good action today. God bless. Have a great week.